Called by name. A story inspired by Isaiah 43 1-5. But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. Neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Saviour. I gave Egypt for thy ransom, Ethiopia and Seba for thee. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and people for thy life. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. The night was heavy with silence. A young wanderer named Eli stood at the edge of a vast wilderness, the wind brushing against his face like a question he could not answer. Behind him lay everything he had known: loss, confusion, voices that told him he was forgotten. Ahead of him stretched uncertainty. He whispered into the darkness, "Does anyone see me?" For a moment nothing answered. Then, not from the sky, not from the earth, but from somewhere deeper than both, a voice came, gentle yet unshakable. "Eli." He froze. It wasn't just a sound. It was recognition. The voice of God spoke powerfully, the kind that reaches into the deepest part of a soul. "I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine." The words wrapped around him, not like chains, but like belonging. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel lost. Through the waters. Days later, Eli found himself standing before a raging river. It churned violently, its waters crashing against jagged stones. There was no bridge, no safe crossing. Fear rose quickly. "This is where I stop," he thought. But then the voice returned steady as before. "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee." Eli hesitated, then stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the river, the current did not disappear, but it no longer felt stronger than him. Each step was still difficult, the water rising to his chest, pulling, resisting, but it did not take him under. Not because the river was weak, but because he was no longer alone. He crossed. Breathing hard, soaked and trembling, he turned back to look at the river and realized something had changed. It had not overcome him. Through the fire. Further along his journey, Eli entered a valley scarred by fire. The ground was warm beneath his feet, the air thick with heat. Flames flickered in the distance, leaping and twisting like living things. Every instinct told him to run. But again the voice spoke. "When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned." This time Eli did not ask how. He walked. The fire drew close, surrounding him, roaring with intensity, but it did not consume him. The heat pressed against him, yet something unseen stood between him and destruction. And in that moment, Eli understood. The promise was not that there would be no fire. The promise was that the fire would not have the final word. Precious in my sight. One evening, as the sun fell behind distant hills, Eli sat alone again, but this time the loneliness felt different. It was quieter, softer. The voice came once more. "Since thou wast precious in my sight, I have loved thee." Eli lowered his head. "Even when I was lost?" He asked. "Yes." "Even when I was afraid?" "Yes." "Even when I didn't believe?" The answer did not change. "Yes." And something inside him broke not in pain, but in release. The weight he had carried, the need to prove himself, to be worthy, to earn love began to fall away. Because this love had never been earned. It had always been given. Gathered from every direction. Years passed. Eli was no longer the same wanderer who stood at the edge of the wilderness. He had crossed rivers, walked through fire, and learned the quiet strength of being held by something greater than himself. One day he stood on a hill overlooking a vast land. People were gathering from distant places, from east and west, from broken paths and long journeys. And he heard the voice again. "I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west." Eli watched as strangers became a people, as the lost found direction, as those who thought they were forgotten discovered they had always been known, and he understood. This promise was never just for him. It was for anyone who had ever stood in the dark and wondered if they were seen. The anchor that remains. As night fell once more, Eli stood under the stars. The same voice that had called him in the beginning was still there, unchanged, unwavering. Not loud, not distant, but constant. And as the wind moved gently through the trees, Eli whispered, not with doubt this time, but with quiet certainty, "I am not alone." Because the one who had called him by name still did. Called by name, the voice that remains. The years did not erase the memory of that voice, they deepened it. Eli had learned something few could explain. The voice did not always grow louder with time. Sometimes it grew quieter, but clearer. It no longer startled him as it once had in the wilderness. Now it settled into him like breath, constant, unseen, life-giving. And yet, there came a season when everything would be tested again. The return of the storm. It began without warning. The skies darkened over the land he had come to love. The people who had once gathered in hope now trembled under uncertainty. Crops failed. Divisions rose. Fear spread like a shadow at dusk. Eli walked among them, hearing their questions. Where is God now? Has he forgotten us? Were the promises only for another time? The words struck him not because he hadn't heard them before, but because they echoed something deep within him. That old feeling, the edge of the wilderness. For the first time in years, Eli stood in silence, and did not immediately hear the voice. The silence that speaks. Days passed. Eli withdrew to a quiet place, far from the noise, far from the fear. He stood again at the edge of a river different from the one before, but just as restless. He waited. Nothing. He knelt. Still nothing. A thought crept in, subtle but sharp. What if the voice is gone? His chest tightened, but then something shifted not around him, but within him. The memory of the words rose up, not as an echo, but as something alive. Fear not, for I am with thee. Eli opened his eyes. The voice had not disappeared. It had taken root. Becoming the witness, Eli returned to the people, not with dramatic signs, not with fire from heaven, but with something quieter and, in many ways, stronger, certainty. He stood before them and spoke. The waters did not disappear when I crossed them. The fire did not go out when I walked through it. But I was not alone, and neither are you. Some listened, some doubted. Some turned away, but a few held on, and that was enough. Because Eli had learned something the wilderness could never teach on its own. Faith is not proven when the voice is loud. It is proven when the voice is remembered. The hidden presence. One night, as Eli walked through the troubled land, he came across a young girl sitting alone, her face buried in her hands. "I don't hear him," she said before he could even speak. "Everyone says he's there, but I don't hear anything." Eli sat beside her. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said gently, "There was a time I thought the same thing." She looked up, surprised. "What did you do?" Eli looked out into the distance, where the horizon met the fading light. I remembered what he said when I could hear him. He turned back to her, and I chose to believe it hadn't changed. The gathering light. Slowly, something began to happen, not all at once. Not in a way that could be easily measured. But hearts began to steady. Fear loosened its grip. And people one by one began to stand again, not because the storms had vanished, but because they were no longer defined by them. Eli watched as those from distant places continued to gather. Some came with stories of rivers they had crossed. Others spoke of fires they had endured. Different journeys. Same promise. I will be with thee, the unseen flame. In his later years, Eli often returned to the quiet places, the riverbanks, the hills, the spaces where everything had begun. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the air grew still, he closed his eyes, and there it was again. Not seen with the eyes, not heard with the ears, but known. A presence steady, unchanging, like a flame that never consumed yet never faded. And in that moment, Eli understood something even deeper than before. The promise was never just about being saved from waters or fire. It was about being kept through them. The final whisper, as the stars emerged one by one, Eli spoke softly into the night. You called me when I was lost. You walked with me through everything, and you never left. The wind moved gently, carrying with it that same quiet certainty that had followed him from the beginning. Not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. And though the world around him would continue to change, rivers would rise, fires would burn, nations would shift, the voice remained, calling, keeping, holding. I have called thee by thy name, and it still does.